all the students there, here's a tip off. Dr. Anantha Nageswaran is a PhD in economics. He is from IIM Ahmedabad. He's worked in hedge funds. He's worked in think tanks. He's written books. Now he's the Chief Economic Advisor of Government of India. I suggest all of you, whoever wants to meet him, no matter which stream you are pursuing, you can ask him for a few Guru Mantras. I can't sort of push that very far ahead. Myself being from Tanjore, they'll be saying that this is a whole Tanjore district conspiracy here. So, and Anantha's an old friend. He has come armed with several slides, and I saw him sort of fixing it. And everything that you ask him, he will provide evidence on the screen. But Anant, we'll try and stay away from I want people to know, is this thing that the rising India is, how true is it? How big is it? I know we've grown 7+% GDP. How would you sort of make the youngsters here and the audience understand what is the magnitude of this moment?
Thank you, Shankkar, and very happy to be here. I know that you have a flight to catch, and therefore you want quick-fire answers. So let me try to give you point by point. We are not only doing well in absolute terms, we are also doing better than others. And if in next financial year, 24-25, we also grow at 7%, as RBI governor has said somewhere in Davos, that would be the 4th consecutive year we would have grown at 7 or above after COVID. So it is one thing for India to grow at 8 to 9% as it did between 2004 and 2008 when the world economy was booming. But to grow at 7% when the world economy is struggling and there are so many geopolitical uncertainties for 4 consecutive years post-COVID, I think that is a creditable
And in a world where China is not growing.
And in a world where rest of Asia is struggling, including China, I think it is indeed a creditable achievement because 1 unit of growth in this situation is much more valuable than 1 unit of growth when the whole world is doing much better.
So there used to be this thing that India contributes 0.2%. 25 years back, I heard that. What is India's contribution to global growth now?
I think it is now heading towards 10%, and by the end of the decade, it would be close to 1/6 of global GDP would be coming from Indian growth alone.
And by the end of the decade, what would be our GDP be roughly?
This is something that I have been sticking my neck out and saying, although I don't believe that numbers are the be-all and end-all. But I think $7 trillion at current exchange rate in 7 years. That's so easy to remember, 7 in 7.
7 in 7 years. So every year we will add $1 trillion to our GDP.
No, every year we're talking about adding about $500 billion.
$500 billion. Okay. Yeah. So now, obviously in the absolute terms and in the relative terms, India is the fastest large economy, fastest growing large economy, fastest growing free market democracy, all the things are there. But parts of India, large parts of India don't feel so. The feel good is not sort of there. For instance, as someone who looks at these numbers, the thing that struck me is that the GDP grew by 7.3%, but private financial consumption, which is consumption by people like us, grew by 4.2 or 4.3%. The other thing is, if you're in the markets, if you are people who are running companies in the products that are at the edge, the frontier of the consumption basket, small motorcycles or things. So they seem to be suggesting. Yesterday I heard somebody say that this festival quarter was among the worst in several years in terms of inventory, in terms of sales. Now, that might be one point of view. But the general impression in the economy people sort of have is that the buy now, pay later categories of consumption is grown, but pay now to consume now is sort of struggling. And so I said in half in jest, the whole government runs in buy now, pay later for economics. But what is the truth? Where, I mean, I'm sure there is consumption because the GST figures are showing consumption. But the GST figure consumption doesn't sort of reflect, or this doesn't reflect there. What is the story?
No, I think as with many things, you know, for every statement you make about India, as Joan Robinson said, the opposite be equally true. And it is true that rural consumption is not growing at the same rate as urban consumption. But I don't believe that we have a so-called K-shaped recovery. Because the way you talk about K, it's as if one portion of the economy is growing and the other is contracting. But that's not the case. You can say that some portions are growing faster and some are growing less. But it's important to remember that much of these things are anecdotal in nature simply because we don't collect statistics on the basis of urban and rural demarcations. Even if you go to, for example, the Federation of Automobile Dealers Association, FADA, gives you automobile sales. They don't collect statistics on the basis of urban versus rural. So when the two-wheeler sales, people say two-wheeler sales is a proxy for rural consumption. It is not picking up. The moment you say, no, look at the recent data, last 3 months it is picking up quite well, then they turn around and say, no, but two-wheeler sales which are in affordable category are not picking up. Then you go to FADA and ask them, can you give me the kind of breakdown? They don't have that kind of breakdown. So many of these statements are also based on very anecdotal samples that are happening. But that said, I do track some of these indicators from a company that is based out of Tamil Nadu, Kavin Care, etc. So within rural India, discretionary consumption spending, for example, a haircut may be necessary after some periodic intervals, but a facial and some kind of hair coloring, etc., are all discretionary spending.
This will get you into trouble. You know, there's a lot of part of the audience which will not agree with you.
No. What they're saying is some of these expenses are postponable. So therefore, they say that they do see pickup in these kinds of expenditure also. Where ordinary consumers who want to undertake an expenditure which they can afford to postpone, they are not postponing. And as I mentioned earlier, two-wheeler sales, even at the lower price category, is beginning to rise. And yes, rural real wages have been just about matching the inflation rate, but in the last couple of quarters, they are beginning to rise above the inflation rate. And therefore, I feel that this gap that we have witnessed, or which we are hearing about from anecdotal stories about urban consumption versus rural consumption, is probably getting closer. Let me also add one last point before I let you come up to the next question. The Indian Institute of Urban Development said in a 2014 report that 35% of the area that is currently considered as urban is because of rural areas redesignated as urban in 2001 to 10. So the expansion of urban land space, 1/3 happened because of rural spaces getting relabeled. So when you talk of urban consumption doing well, remember there are still large parts of rural area which are counted as urban, so they are doing well. So this entire dichotomy between urban and rural may not be as pervasive as is being made out to be, while there may be pockets of it. Yeah.
Fair enough. There are two other data points that I want to sort of just to explain where the economy is. The central question for us is, why is that feel-good factor not palpable in certain geographies?
No, but if you look at the fact that last 4 years, you have had participation of people from tier 2, tier 3 cities and rural portions in the stock market, etc. It couldn't have happened unless there was wealth generation happening in those cities as well. It is no longer confined to the metros. So my point is, for every statement, we can always find some evidence in the country in some pockets where the diffusion is not happening. But it is true that the large portions of the country, because the government is giving them free education, free food, and also affordable housing. So many of their basic parameters are indeed taken care of, and that is why you see in the multidimensional poverty index, you see such a large decline in the multidimensional poverty index. Because the disposable income that is left in the hands of the people now, because the government is taking care of many essential needs, is more than what it used to be.
So here's the contrast, the contradiction or the contrarian argument to this. Is that on one level, the government says we have moved 250 million people out of multidimensional poverty line. The government says we are growing at 7+%. The government says that consumption has gone up, so many more mobile phones, so many more people on data, so much data is consumed. And that all of that is true. And yet, the political response to this economic growth is 81 crore people are getting free ration, 10 crore gas cylinders under the Ujjwala scheme, I think 3 crore, 2.5 to 3 crores PM Awas Yojana, about 26 million people are registered, 26 crore people are registered on the National Rural Employment. And every election, every party is saying that we will give free cylinder, free this, free that. Is there a divergence between how the politicians or the political parties perceive the economy to be and how we perceive the economy?
I think again, this is a special topic in and of itself for a discussion. I don't think you can compress it within half an hour conversation.
I am aware, okay, acutely, but
no, I think yes. Your point is well taken. That if there is such a palpable improvement in the economic performance, then do we need all these? I think it is fair to ask, but I think. There are some segments of the population that are still making the transition to better opportunities because they now have these essential things taken care of. But at what point you draw the line, at what point you I
mean, I can understand maybe 40 crore need, but if free rationalism, should it be 80 crore? I mean, that's the question. And you know, they have increased procurement price, they have increased there is now the PM Kisan is PM scheme plus top up. The gas cylinder LPG is top up. So there is this question that is coming is how much can this be done?
I would say one thing. Shankkar, you have been in this journalism business for 30 years, right? So
40 years. 40 years.
40 years. So I have been a chief economic advisor only for 2 years.
Okay.
So you have a 20 times head start over me. So I would simply say that therefore you have a very great question here, and let's move on.
No, so I mean, you know, I am a believer that in 2 years back I wrote in the New Indian Express that Destination India, the $1 trillion dream sort of unrolls, and that. At that time I was asked, why am I saying? Just like when I wrote a book on Aadhaar and called it the 12-digit revolution, people said, what revolution? And now people are saying that, okay, it's the question is that can you be, so this has been, the government has spent 60, 67, 68 lakh crores in the last 7 years on infrastructure. That has pushed growth. We see metros everywhere, we see roads. The change is very visible. There is no question about it. People who are traveling by Vande Bharat, they're celebrating being on Vande Bharat, which is another interesting. But can this be done? I mean, how far can you sort of move this story? Can you go on being funding? And CRISIL says that Government of India is going to spend 142 lakh crores in the next 7 years. Is that fundable? Is it doable? What needs to be done? What's your snapshot?
Let me just quickly show certain things to the audience here in terms of the infrastructure spending, which we talked about, which Shankkar has been talking about. So capital expenditure of the union government has gone up from just around 1.8% of GDP on the left side. The green line is taking you to 3.5, 3.6% of GDP. And then here on the right side, the private sector is also beginning to spend. So your question is it sustainable? The left side chart, is it sustainable? I think there is still some scope. Maybe the pace of increase that we had to do between 2018 and 2024 for the last 6 financial years may not necessarily have to be sustained at the same pace. Part of that was because of COVID, and part of that because the financial sector and the corporate sector was still repairing balance sheets. So somebody had to do the investment, and who better than the government, which is the best credit rating in the country. So now that the private corporate sector is willing to step in and is stepping in, as you see on the right side, I think there is scope for the government to not to pull back in absolute terms, but to pull back the rate of growth.
So the interesting thing is that in the stock market, you would have heard that all the public sector shares have sort of rocketed in the last 2 years. Some crazy 300%, 200%. And they're all beneficiaries, of the government spending on infrastructure. From your take, that if the private sector picks up the slack, invests in new projects, which we are just about hearing, I don't know how much of that is going to come through, and we probably know after the election. If that comes through, you think there will be a more generalized, more universalized investment growth?
I think so. We may not get back to the 2006, 2007, where we went to 38% of GDP, but currently we are at 30% of GDP, the capital formation in the economy, investment rate. I think that can pick up at least up to the mid-30s in the next 3 to 4 years. That is possible, and that is sustainable. And if you have a ratio of the efficiency of capital is 4 to 5 times, then you're talking about 7% GDP growth at 35% investment rate. So it's possible.
So Anand, now there's a large number of young people are there, and this is an education conference. Does all this growth, is it translating into jobs, or is it translating in some sectors, some geographies?
Yeah. I think it is translating into jobs. You can look at this from the point of view of the, let me go back to the previous, here you go. So, the truth is, if you look at the labor force participation rate, the amount of people who are ready to get into the labor market, this is a 435-page report of the Ministry of Labor and Statistics, the annual periodic labor force survey. There are lots of things that we need improvement on in terms of the people who have formal contracts, the people who have regular wage-paying jobs. Those proportions are still relatively smaller. But it is equally true, though, that the unemployment rate was 21% during the pandemic peak. Now it is down to 6.6% in urban India. And if you look at the overall unemployment rate, including rural India, it is 3.2%. And people say that women are now taking up agricultural jobs. It is not because of distress, because most of the jobs that women are taking up in rural India in agriculture are market-related activities. So it is not subsistence wages, it is proper wages. So in that sense, the job market situation is improving. And if you look at the formal sector, in 21-22, IT sector created jobs. In 22-23, financial services created jobs. 8% growth in 21-22, 5.5% growth in 22-23. So the economy is, and then we are completely excluding the gig economy, which employs close to 700,000 or 7 lakh workers. And you see it in the Employee Provident Fund Organization net enrollment, which is stepping up year after year. So job creation is indeed happening, but more organized sector jobs more have to be created. And even in the organized sector jobs, smaller proportion are the ones who are having a proper contract, social security benefits, etc. All those things have to improve. So there is much work that remains to be done.
I'll take, Kaveri, we can take questions? Okay. Dean sir. உங்கள்கிட்ட அப்புறம் வரேன் முதல்ல ஸ்டூடெண்ட் ஓகே தட் யங் பாய் தேர்
குட் ஆஃப்டர்நூன் சார் சார் டில் 2019
one பேர் என்ன சொல்லுமா ஐடென்டிஃபை யுவர்செல்ஃப்
I am Sandhya Kumaravel from Kingmakers IAS Academy. I'm basically an UPSC aspirant.
Okay.
So till 2019 we were receiving 2 volumes of economic survey. Like the reforms part was being missing for 3 years, sir. We hardly require this time. Can we expect the same?
So UPSC aspirants are missing the 2 volumes, is it?
Yeah, of course. That's a big concern, sir.
No. We did bring out a volume, by the way. I think you probably missed it. End of December, we brought out a collection of essays. It is still available in the Department of Economic Affairs website. See, we turned it back to one volume survey in the last 2 years, not because of lack of time or because of COVID or whatever. Economic survey is what it should be. It is a survey of the economy. The larger idea generation of the Office of the Chief Economic Advisor should not be confused with the economic survey. So we did it separately and we brought it out in December, end of December. Similarly, for this financial year, because this is going to be an interim budget, there will be a mini survey coming out in the next few days. And there'll be a full survey after the elections, before the full budget. And in that survey, we will talk about some of the best practices that many civil servants spoke about here that happen in different parts of the country. For example, you look at stunting in children, height for weight. Sikkim and Bihar have done exceptionally well. We want to feature how Sikkim and Bihar manage it compared to other states. So those kinds of stories and policy decisions taken, implemented, etc., which can then serve as an inspiration and model for other states and other districts. We will cover all those angles in the July survey. But you must take a look at the collection of essays we brought out end of December.
Particularly, you should read the debate on why India's ratings are not what they should be. Okay, next question, young man there.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah.
Myself, Balaji, currently pursuing bachelor's in electrical engineering. So I have one question for you, sir. In recent quarter of our GDP data shown 7.6%, but GVA, the gross value added, is declining a lot, especially in the IT sector and manufacturing sector. So, which is the major GDP contributor in our GDP. So, how come GDP can grow when key sector like IT and manufacturing is in trouble?
You must have seen in the data that there are sectors like mining, construction, tourism, hospitality, and other services, they are growing. You get the breakdown of the GVA. Obviously, not all sectors will be able to grow at the same rate at all times. The IT sector is subject to global cycles, and therefore there will be periods when they will wax and wane. But the data gives you the breakdown of which sectors are contributing at what points in time. And therefore, if there is a slack in one sector or the other, there are other sectors that are making up for it. More recent periods, I think construction, mining, manufacturing, tourism and hospitality and other services, they have been rising even if the IT sector has not contributed as much in 22-23 and also in the first half year of 23-24.
Okay, we have to wrap up now. Dean sir, you are escaping your question?
Very quick question. Recently, you were very critical about the World Bank metric used by credit rating agencies on investment safety of countries. Now, World Bank, IMF itself, they themselves are getting irrelevant. And I know about your deep research, empirical models that you're developing. Do you have an alternate framework that you're working? Can we expect that soon? Because now India is no longer going to consume anything. We have to contribute to the larger scheme of things. Alternate credit rating. Because these credit rating agencies are the ones who escape all crises and still surviving, enriching themselves.
Right. No, I think there are two parts to your question. Whether we have alternative methodological proposals, we have made them in that particular essay which Shankkar also referred to in this collection of essays. That's the first essay. So we have made some proposals to these credit rating agencies. Then the second part of your question will be, if they don't do these things, do we have an alternative credit rating mechanism itself? Now, that is a completely different set of problems because they have 100 years of incumbency advantage. And if we sponsor some credit rating agencies, they will naturally face the problem of upstart versus established oligopolist. So it's a different problem to solve. And that may not be solved in a year or two. It is a process.